there going to be some new thing that's going to be discussed that we should look for?
I think it'll build on the past in that there is the framework, as you said, there is the whole rebalancing agenda, the need to spur domestic demand, particularly in surplus countries, to move towards more market-oriented exchange rates where they don't exist. And so they will build very much on that process. It'll also build on initiatives like the Cannes Action Plan, which was really about how to ensure the recovery and restore growth. And obviously the situation has changed somewhat since Cannes, so it's even more urgent now. The countries are focusing on what they need to do to promote growth.
Okay, thanks. We'll come back in a second, but Terry, let me ask you, from a business perspective, what do you see as the key things to look for at Los Cabos, and what does business want to get out of the G20 more generally?
In a word, I'd say focus. And Matt, it's always good being with you. It's terrific being with Mike as well. Mike, does so much for this administration in terms of so many policy matters and the like, and so it's always good to share views with you on this one. And I come back to the word focus. We're talking, and we can go into a lot of process kinds of things, scorecards, and how we're going to measure certain things, and how robust the agenda is going to be. The serious nature of the current environment means that I think we need to do fewer things, and Mike is right. It's got to be all about growth on this one. We were all concerned in Cannes about the situation in the Eurozone. It has now gotten worse. And it's not just a issue that I think somebody said on one of the panels this morning that's for Europe to work out. I don't think so anymore. The contagion effect and the ripple effect that's having right now on the economy is creating much more of a dire situation for the United States in terms of its growth rates. We're seeing it impact the BRICS. And we've seen it with China and the manufacturing side. We've seen it in India in particular, Brazil also on that one. And now that sort of next 11, the Indonesias, the Malaysias, the Turkeys, the Hungary, they're starting to get impacted. And so if we don't come together in some way and start to create a more focused agenda on this one, the continuation of this is going to have some very serious social and economic issues. So from a business standpoint, everything has got to be about economic growth, and with it, obviously, job creation and improved standards of living and all of those kind of things that we talked about earlier. For us, the most important issue has got to be the enhancement of the capital markets. If we're talking about just the infrastructure spending that we were talking about earlier, some $70 trillion by 2030 worldwide. Standard & Poor's has it at a little over 40 trillion by 2016. This is a short time frame on this one, and a massive amount of money. The banks are not going to be in anywhere near a position to provide that kind of capital. So we must go to the capital markets, and therefore some of the things that you were talking about, Mike, in terms of regulation and all of these kind of things, we have to improve the process by which we were doing. And I think that we heard from Rupert this morning about where we are with the Financial Stability Board and some of the mechanisms here. And I think that, one of the words that Rick Johnson was using was institutionalizing both the G20, the B20, the Financial Stability Board. That is exactly what needs to take place. But if we don't enhance the capital markets and the funding of all of this, we've got some very serious concerns. The second one, for growth, and everything focused on growth on this one, is trade and investment, and we're just not moving fast enough. We've had a very disappointing Doha agenda, in terms of results. The World Trade Organization doesn't seem to, providing some of the leadership that we need, on that part, and we need to be able to do more. But we have to have a better agenda that is going to allow more people to participate that way. And then the last one that I think is the most important is that as the services sector becomes stronger and a bigger portion of our overall economy, if you're not protecting intellectual property in terms of content, you're going to pay a price for that on that. So I think that from a business standpoint, everything now, because of the environment, has got to be focused on economic growth. And I would love to be talking about green growth initiatives. I'd love to be talking about food security and the like. But I think in terms of the priorities, we got to get after the capital markets, trade and investment, and intellectual property.
Right. Okay. Well, I think there's a unanimity up here that growth is what this is all about. Mike, on those 3 points, are those issues that are going to be addressed? And in particular, I'm interested in the trade one and whether now that you at Cannes last year effectively said that Doha, it may have reached its limits, and we need to look at other approaches. How does the G20 take that conversation forward?
Yeah. No, I very much agree with the importance of the issues that Terry cited, and very importantly, as he said, growth is an end in itself, but it's also very much a means towards jobs. And the focus on jobs, when we had the G20 presidency around Pittsburgh, we launched a labor ministerial to begin looking at labor issues. That tradition has continued. You see extraordinary unemployment rates in some parts of the world. Obviously, it's higher than we'd like to see it here, but when you look at Europe, where in some countries the unemployment rate is 24, 25%, and it's literally over 50% for the youth in places like Spain. This is a real, serious social issue as well as an economic issue, and it's something that the G20 has spent some time on and needs to spend more time on. On the trade agenda, I'm actually somewhat more optimistic than Terry. You're right that at Cannes, the leaders said it's time to look at fresh, innovative approaches to pursue the multilateral trade agenda and trade liberalization more generally, consistent with some of the objectives of Doha. And that has been our approach since. And we are beginning to see in Geneva a bit of progress on a plurilateral services agreement or a information technology agreement that's updated, or a multilateral trade facilitation agreement where more and more developing countries are saying this is really important to our ability to develop and to grow. So there's obviously a lot more work to be done, but I would expect that the leaders, as they focus on trade, will be focusing on what to do to pursue that agenda, while each of us also pursues other parts of the trade agenda. In our case, TPP, and we just had the Commissioner de Gucht from the European Commission here yesterday to spend several hours working on the transatlantic trade initiative. And so each of us will pursue our own ways of doing that, as well as strengthening the WTO and its capacity to further trade liberalization. But I think Terry is right that we need to stay focused on the core issues here. And right now, growth and jobs related to that are very much at the core. One last thing on IPR. One of the little-known things that came out of the G8, actually, at Camp David, were a series of agreements by the G8 about strengthening and raising the standards on intellectual property rights protection. And that's something the G8 will be working on, and we welcome other countries working with us on that and creating higher and higher global standards, because we agree with you that that's a key part of innovation and growth going forward.
Right. That's actually an important point, and not many people read the communiques all the way through, but it's important to, because there are often embedded in there some little jewels that actually are quite significant, if not big headline grabbing issues, and I expect that to be the case in the G20 as well. So let me ask a process question of both of you, or each of you, slightly different question. So, well, it's maybe the same question, which is, do you feel that the fact that the Mexicans, for kind of coincidental reasons, moved up the summit to June instead of doing it in the sort of more traditional fall, November timeframe, has been a good thing, a lucky thing, a fortunate thing, given what's going on in the world and the risks to the global economy? And the reason I'm asking that is the G20 particularly relevant to addressing those risks? Because just as I said in the earlier remarks this morning before you were here, just a couple of months ago, there were a lot of people talking about the G20 as sort of irrelevant and has lost its mojo since the crisis has passed. But it feels as though this conversation is going to be more important than people thought a while ago. No, I'm watching.
Okay. Look, I think this is likely to be an important conversation. I mean, one of the values of these summits is that they create action-forcing events, and they focus attention. And They require not only bureaucracies but leaders to become focused and make some critical decisions. And that is certainly the case now as the Europeans, who of course ultimately are the ones who need to make the decisions about what to do with regards to the Eurozone crisis, as they prepare for Los Cabos and they know this will be a major issue of discussion, I think it serves as a useful action-forcing event in that regard. So I don't know how one defines G20 mojo, but I think there'll be plenty of it around in Los Cabos.
Okay.
Well, I liked your comment up front, Mike, that between G8, G20, whatever, that we ought to meet every month. We ought to stop trying to create
sure the
these
president
big
agrees with it.
events, and when we get to Russia, we'll really get onto our agenda and all of those kind of things. And the more we are together, and the more we're doing things together, and the more that we're cooperating between business and government, working on a very focused agenda, I think more will happen. I think this is very exciting for Mexico. I think President Calderon is a very pro-business, pro-trade, pro-growth president. He's putting an awful lot of energy into it. Alejandro Ramirez, wherever you are, has done so much in terms of making all the logistics come together on this. On this one, and I think it's great for South America. I mean, so much has happened, so much growth. The passage of the trade agreements just with Colombia and Panama, this past year, it really is going to put some attention to it. But again, we're still early on in the institutionalizing of the G20. We keep talking about, who's the secretariat, who's going to set what agenda, how are you going to define accountability, how do you measure progress, and all of these things, and it's a work in process. And so, the fact that it's sooner than anything, I think is good. And I think that, we've just got to really focus on fewer things.
Okay, let me open it up to the floor and let you ask questions. When you do, please wait for the microphone and identify yourselves, and please try to ask a question because I know there are going to be a lot. This lady here, so if we have a mic. Well, but people in the back can't hear you,
Here it
and
comes.
all the thousands of people watching on television won't be able to hear you.
A former school teacher.
Hi, I'm Jutta Hinnig from Inside U.S. Trade. I wanted to follow up on two key points that Mr. Froman made. One is on the TPP. Do you expect a decision on the new entrants, Canada, Mexico, Japan's, being able to join the negotiations, or is this an issue of that will await further discussion among the current participants? And on the high-level working group, do you expect the June report to reflect a consensus between the two sides on how to proceed, which was not the case leading into the June 4 meeting, or do you expect the two sides to still reflect different approaches in the report?
You always know much more about our meetings than I do.
I'm too
You're
old
very
to be
good sources, Jutta.
I'm too old not to remember my mother's warning against lines just like that.
Bravo. So you'll get a very unsatisfactory answer that it's too early to tell on both your questions. On the new entrants, we are in consultations with all three countries. We're having discussions, and it's just too early to tell exactly where those conversations will go and whether all three of them are ready themselves to join and whether we are ready to have them join. So we have to leave that, I think, for some further discussions. And on the end June report, we are now in the process of just beginning to draft it. You probably already have a copy, but it is too early to tell. And if not, it'll happen by the time we leave here. It is too early to tell exactly where that will come out. All I would say is we've had very good discussions with our European counterparts. USTR and DG Trade have done a very good job of doing analysis and exploring what the opportunities are and also exploring what the obstacles are to a comprehensive trade and investment agreement. And we're working through those issues, and we'll see where it comes out.
Great. Terry, you wanted to?
Do you
Yeah.
expect the leaders
Well, this is a G20 meeting, and so there's not a TPP meeting there or things of that sort. So I think it's unclear what the, at this point, we don't anticipate having a meeting that discusses TPP per se at Los Cabos.
Great. Terry, you want to say?
Yeah, on Trans-Pacific Partnership, I think that from a business standpoint, I'm not a part of the administration, so I can say a little bit more directly on it. We want speed on this one. We want inclusion is a big deal. We would like to see others come into the partnership. I think, but we got to get it done. We'd like to see something in 2012. And I think that for Canada, Mexico, and Japan to come in, they should come in under the standards of which the other 9 have already agreed. And therefore, we cannot spend a lot of time renegotiating individual components. Flexibility is always an operative word. But we think that inclusion is good, but you have to come in under the agreement of what the 9 have done on this one. But speed, get it done, is what the business community wants.
Okay. Although, yeah, okay, I won't make my own comment. Right here in the front.
Ian Tiley, Dow Jones. Thank you for doing this. Germany has consistently come in at the 11th hour in the Euro crisis to sort of put some would say a Band-Aid, others would say paper over, or kick the can down the road a little further. Are we at a point in the crisis where any action from Germany is too little, too late? What gives you any hope for optimism? And secondly, administration has said that they expect actions in the coming weeks to bolster the Euro banking system. I'm having difficulty seeing how exactly or what exactly U.S. wants or expects, out of Europe, and how that will actually solve Spain's recapitalization problem.
Well, I guess I'd start by saying I think Europe has taken a number of very important steps in the last months to address the crisis and give great credit to Chancellor Merkel and her government for moving the European system towards that action, whether it's in erecting the firewall against contagion, allowing liquidity to be provided to the banks, or starting on a path of significant reform, structural and otherwise. There really has been a lot of action in Europe. Now, clearly, what's clear now from the markets is that they expect more, and more is needed. And there's a robust debate going on in Europe about how best to address the short, medium, and longer-term issues, whether it's the aftermath of the Greek election, where a number of difficult and important decisions will be made by the Greek people, or how to deal with the vulnerabilities of the Spanish banking system, or how to create a growth strategy for Europe to go along with the fiscal pact, or how to reform the institutions of Europe so as to strengthen integration and match on the banking side or the fiscal side the kind of integration that's existed on the monetary side or the single market area. And so those are all remarkably difficult challenges, and I think they are trying to work their way through that. They are seized with the importance of what they're doing, with the urgency of some of those issues, and I think we would expect, whether in the coming weeks, that they will continue to make progress in taking steps in that direction. They have all the capability to do so, they have the will to do so, and my sense is they're working very hard at it.
Can I just follow up to say, I mean, when you actually talk about this stuff in the G20, presumably, it's, as you said, these are mostly European challenges, and so they're presumably going to be presenting what they've done, what they're planning to do, to take forward what they've already done, and how they're addressing the immediate problems. Do others then sort of respond to that? I mean, I'm sure that the U.S. will have views on that, but will other members of the group? I mean, will China, Brazil, others, are they interested in this? Are they concerned about it? And is there a real back and forth then with everybody participating?
Well, I think there is certainly global concern and interest right now about what's going on in the Eurozone and what steps need to be taken to address it. And I would expect that all of the G20 countries will have a strong interest in what Europe will be coming to Los Cabos with and want to engage with them substantively on what needs to be done. But we should also put the Eurozone crisis and the actions that Europe needs to take, which is the most critical set of issues at the moment, in the broader context of the overall G20 effort to rebalance demand and create balanced, strong, and sustainable growth. Because we all have issues and we all have actions that we need to take, whether on our side, spurring growth in the short run and achieving medium-term fiscal sustainability. On the side of China, issues around the exchange rate and spurring domestic demand. Issues with other surplus countries about moving towards greater demand and allowing more freely determined exchange rates. So we all have things that we can contribute to the effort to make strong, balanced, and sustainable growth. And to me, that's really the heart of the G20. It's the forum for collective action. And at any point in time, the issues of one country may be paramount over, or one region may be paramount over the issues faced by others, but we all have a role to play in trying to deal with the overall challenge.
Okay, great. Way back there, lady with the hand up on the right. Yeah. Sorry, hold on.
Whoops.
No, go ahead. The lady, yep, the one standing. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Scotty Greenwood, Canadian American Business Council. Thanks for doing it. Great program. Michael, another slightly different couple questions on TPP. One is, could you imagine, instead of doing 0 or 3, doing one country? I have one in mind. But is that possible, or do you think the United States has to say yes to the new entrants all at once, or could you do a phased approach? That's the first part. The second part is, given the president's strong growth agenda and doubling exports and all of that, if you assume for a moment that Canada is ready and demonstrates that it's ready, what reason would there be not to admit Canada to the TPP at this point? Thanks.
Well, look, I think we are working with all three countries and consulting with all three of them in frankly exactly the same way. In parallel fashion, we have the same approach to all three countries in terms of the nature of our dialogue to ensure that they're committed to the level of ambition that the TPP represents. And as Terry said, we don't want to slow this down for new entrants. We don't want to reopen or renegotiate issues that have been settled as we allow new entrants. On the other hand, we know that new entrants don't want to accept just a rubber stamp agreement. They're going to want to be part of the process, and it's striking that balance that we're working through. We haven't made a decision about 1, 2, or 3 because we haven't had to make that decision yet. We're proceeding down 3 parallel paths with them, and at the end of the day, we'll see which ones are ready and whether that's an issue that we have to address. I don't think there's any particular reason we have to hold up 1 or 2 if a third one is going to take a bit more time, but we don't have to address that question yet because it's hypothetical at this moment. And with regard to the particular issues we have with each country, we have issues with each country. And Canada is a terrific partner of the United States, a strategic ally, one of our closest partners across such a broad range of issues. And we work very closely with them. But we do have trade frictions, long-standing trade frictions. And we want to make sure as we're exploring their entry into TPP that we're able to deal with those trade frictions and not import them into TPP. And that's the nature of the dialogue that we're having with them, with Mexico, and with Japan.
Okay. Over there was a gentleman in the back with the...
Adam Taylor with World Vision. 2 questions for Mr. Froman. One is...
You can pick on Terry, by the way.
That's right.
And Terry, please
He knows
feel
a
free
lot of
to
stuff.
jump in as well.
He's not just a publisher of books. He is...
For both of you then, the first question is on biofuels, which you mentioned. If you could give us just a little more insight about what the U.S. perspective and strategy is on addressing that, what you hope to get accomplished, particularly from the food security side. It is a key driver of escalating food prices, and kind of what do you hope to see accomplished at the G20? Second question is, given all the hard work that went into the Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, I'm wondering if there are any plans to expand or strengthen that through the G20 as we approach Los Cabos.
Yes, absolutely. He's referring to at the G8 we announced a new alliance on food security and nutrition, and really a new approach in the next phase of our food security engagement with Africa and potentially around the world. And we are encouraging other countries to join us, as we did in L'Aquila, and are very much open to having a broader group of countries involved in there. And I think it raises a very important point, because one of the interesting things and potentially great opportunities of the G20 is as it addresses issues around development, and the Koreans added development to the agenda when they hosted the meeting in Seoul, it gives us an opportunity to approach development in a broader gauge sort of way. It's not just about the rich G8 donor countries and how much money they're going to give on any particular issue to a particular region. It is rather an opportunity to say, China is very active in Africa. It's an active investor in Africa. Brazil and India have great capabilities and expertise and technology from their own development experience that may be relevant to the development experience of other developing countries. And the G20, obviously Korea is a great case study in and of itself of a country that's gone through that development very successfully. And so the G20 gives an opportunity to broaden the development agenda to include a much wider range of experiences and a much wider range of actors working together. You know, on biofuels, it's one of several issues in the energy area and the food security area that we look at. And we're keenly aware of the relationship between wanting to do more on biofuels and the impact it has on food security. We try and balance those things out. We think both are important. And so our challenge is to pursue the biofuels agenda as much as we can in a cooperative way with other countries, at the same time addressing the food security needs as well.
Okay. Gentleman there, Gary.
Gary Kleiman, Kleiman International. In the interest of rebalancing, yes, I will follow up on a comment that Terry McGraw made, and probably leaving aside reference to S&P, I want to explore further the capital markets development agenda that you would like to see. And certainly we see there would be immediate relevance even for the Eurozone crisis, where the conspicuous lack of distressed debt markets could certainly feature in the program at the upcoming summit. So what would you like to see, Terry, from the business side? And Michael, do you see this featuring in the program at all, whether it's on the Eurozone or on other issues?
Okay, well, first of all, obviously, you know, the demand is going to be, you know, so strong that the banking system isn't going to be able to keep up with any aspect of it. One of the things that we have to see is the smooth operation of the capital markets, and in particular the fixed income markets. And so as we see local bond markets cropping up around the world, we have to make sure that there's a mechanism in place to help in terms of the regulatory front, in terms of their smooth operation. And so from our standpoint, I think getting some sort of harmonization on the regulatory front, what we have seen you know, is lots and lots of different regulatory efforts. And you can be compliant, you know, in one particular area, and in another area you're not. And so getting after some sort of harmonization, you know, on that process would be very helpful. But again, with the majority of the capital over time coming from, you know, from the markets rather than from banks, we're going to have to see, you know, again, that smooth operation. I think also on the banking structure that there's got to be some cooperation, and I think we heard about that from, you know, Rupert Thorne today on the Financial Stability Board. We have to strengthen, you know, those institutions such that the Financial Stability Board, the IMF, IOSCO, CSER, those institutions have a lot more cooperation.
Okay. All right. Way in the back of the BlackBerry or iPhone or something in their hands. There we go.
Hi, thanks. Stella Dawson at Reuters. The G7 had a telephone call today, and the US Treasury issued a statement saying that they reviewed progress toward financial and fiscal union in Europe. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Is that a priority in your view for us to achieve some type of stability in Europe, that they actually lay out a roadmap toward fiscal and financial union and not just deal with the immediate crises?
Well, I think I'll leave the Treasury statement to speak to the G7 call itself and not comment on that. I would simply say that we do think there are multiple challenges to be dealt with, and the challenge is that they have to all be dealt with more or less at the same time. The immediate issues around strengthening the banking system in places like Spain, and that means creating capacity to provide support, and the medium-term issues of laying out a growth pact to go along with the fiscal pact, and the longer-term issues of Europe's broader integration agenda and the institutional reform that will be required by that. So there's a lot of major decisions ahead for Europe, and I think they're working their way through those as we speak.
Okay. Can't hear you.
Sorry. How important, in your view, is it that we get some clearer indication at the G20 of how they're putting together those short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans?
I think they're working through those issues at the moment, and I think people will be looking and probably expecting Europe to make progress on several of them in the coming weeks. When they come to the G20, this will obviously be a focus of discussion, and my sense is that countries will be eager to hear what their broad perspective is. But these are difficult decisions that the Europeans themselves need to make, and they'll need to work through that through their own process.
Okay, a couple more. Peter? It's okay.
Peter Robinson, USCIB, ICC USA. Mr. Froman, we're all focusing on Mexico, and before too long we'll all be focusing on Russia. And I was just wondering whether you might be able to give us any kind of a preview of the kinds of issues that you're beginning to look at in the next round.
Not yet. You're right that the Russians will take over the chair of the G20. They have not yet laid out what their particular emphasis might be on their agenda. There is an ongoing work program of the G20 that creates some continuity from one presidency to the next. So I'd expect work on the framework, for example, to continue, on regulatory reform, on the international financial institutions and their reform, all to continue, as well as on the development agenda that we talked about. But what's particular area of emphasis any chair or presidency puts on it remains to be seen, and my guess is we'll learn more over the course of the year.
Can I just ask a process clarification? Do the Russians take over on June 20th and have the chair for 18 months or until the next summit, or do the Mexicans continue through the year? Traditionally, the G20 was summit to summit, not calendar year, right?
It's been more or less calendar year, except by agreement. And so Mexico took over the chair on December 1st of last year, so a month early. I think Mexico will probably hold the chair through the bulk of the year, but we also have what's called a troika process that's been put in place. And so while Mexico is chairing, it works closely with the French and the Russians, the previous president and the next presidency, on the management of the G20. So there should be a relatively smooth transition whenever it occurs.
Right. And similarly, after Russia, it's Australia, so they'll be joining the conversation, presumably, once the Russians do take over.
Exactly.
Okay. Over there, the lady in purple. Wait, hold on a sec.
Patricia Brooks with ActionAid. I was just wondering, will there be any progress on any finance mechanisms for the Green Climate Fund to address climate change?
There's been an issue that the finance ministers and the deputies have taken up over the course of the year to look at various mechanisms for financing of the Green Fund. I don't expect decisions to come out of this. In some ways, this is the wrong forum for decisions, because that really is a UN FCCC or rather a multilateral process, and there is a whole process around the Green Fund, including the committee that was charged with setting it up and going through the governance of it. But it is an issue that is on the finance agenda, and it's something that's gotten some attention over the course of the year.
Okay. Let's just take three more in a group, and then we'll wind up. Okay, gentleman down there, go ahead, and then I'll take two others.
Thank you very much. I'm John Ruthroff with Interaction. A question for Terry and Mike. This morning, Alejandro Ramirez described a process that the B-20 was doing to track some of the, I don't know if they're called commitment, but some of the processes they've been going through for the last several years. And I was wondering if there, and of course the G8 now has a much more comprehensive accountability report that's been coming out. Is there any movement within the G20 to track some of the things they've agreed to in the past?
Okay, let's hold that. G20 accountability. Next, over there, gentleman there. And then this lady here.
Yes, Uri Dadush of the Carnegie Endowment. I have a question for both Terry McGraw and Michael Froman. United States is being, of course, severely affected by the euro crisis. Yet, the United States has taken no steps not supported with action the expansion of IMF resources. Can it still continue to claim a position of leadership on international financial issues? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And the lady here in green. One more. Jing, if you could, or David.
Marie Brill, also from ActionAid, and interested to hear a little bit more about the food security agenda. I recognize there's a hope to focus more on some of the growth and finance issues, and at the same time, I think we really did learn after 2008 how intricately tied food security and economic stability are. And so, so two questions. One is, again, on the question of biofuels, in that effort to balance food security and renewable energy sources, can there be any hope for increased action to reduce some of the market distorting processes of supporting biofuels? So looking at subsidies and mandates. The U.S. has taken a great step towards this goal already, and so can there be some pressure on Europe or other countries to also reduce their subsidies and mandates for biofuels production to reduce that competition for agricultural crops is one question. And then the second is in the Cannes process on food security, there was the World Food Program began a pilot project in West Africa for food reserves, and I'm wondering if there's going to be any conversation about sort of food stocks and reserves that will follow with Mexico's presidency.
Okay, so we have accountability, U.S. leadership and IMF resources, biofuels, and the food project.
Your report talks about accountability.
Yeah, maybe
Right.
you could talk
Okay.
about that, and then we'll seg over here. That's a good point.
Okay, as far as the International Chamber of Commerce and the whole role that it plays, with B20, what we came up with was the G20 business scorecard. And the whole notion was, obviously, that if we're coming up with all of these different initiatives by the different kinds of categories on that one, that we are going to hold the G20 accountable to the progress that we're making by country in each of those kinds of initiatives. Now, who gets to determine, whether it's a satisfactory or not satisfactory, and we're working that through. We're working with McKinsey, and we're working with others to grapple with that. But we do believe that it's very, very important that of all the things that we do suggest from a business recommendation standpoint, that we actually just keep in front of us, and we actually, hold ourselves accountable to judge the G20 and what they're capable of doing. But we will be releasing the ICC G20 business scorecard, and we will be making sure that in detail that we're communicating exactly what it is that is taking place and why. And so we hope that's a start. It's not the be-all, end-all, but I think it is a start that when we do talk about doing some of these kind of things, that we do also communicate what exactly is being done.
Can I just broaden the question to you a little bit, Mike, about sort of institutionalizing the G20 and whether that is a part of a broader effort to make some of the processes and the decisions and everything more sort of formalized with maybe a secretariat who would then presumably, be responsible in part for this accountability question. Are those conversations that you're having, or are you just focused on the substantive agenda, or is there talk of strengthening the institution?
There is talk about the process of the substance, and I would say that there still is a view held by most of the members that it's not the right time to create a secretariat and to make it a bureaucratized process, but rather to invest the presidency and the leadership and the leader-led process with the responsibility and the accountability for making sure that initiatives from one year are followed up the next, or terminated when they've been fully fulfilled. Committees don't continue to exist for no particular reason. And to make sure that the leadership and the country-led process is what owns the initiative. And so that's been our dominant view, that the G20 is at its best when, as is the case with Mexico, President Calderon feels ownership of it. He's directed the agenda. He's directed his team. They're fully invested in it. And it's not outsourced to a group of permanent bureaucrats who are charged with producing ongoing reports. But the accountability issue that Terry mentioned is a very important one. And one of the responsibilities we see that the presidency has is to ensure accountability from one year to a next, and that we're not just adding new initiatives, but making sure we're fulfilling the ones that have already been agreed to. I think on the question of U.S. leadership, I think the answer is a simple yes. I don't think there's any doubt that the U.S. is showing global leadership and has the capacity to exercise that leadership. And I think we can go from one issue to another, whether it's what's going on in the G20, what's going on in any number of economic, political, security, foreign policy, national security, or even the issue of the Eurozone itself, where President Obama and the U.S. has played a role in trying to encourage progress along the lines that we've been discussing. And I don't think reducing U.S. power to how much of a check they write to the IMF is a particularly useful way of dimensioning U.S. influence in the world. And finally, on biofuels, I think you've exhausted my knowledge of biofuels, and all I would say is it is interesting that when I go, and one of my jobs, as Matt knows, is to run something called the Major Economies Forum for Energy and Climate, which is mostly climate negotiators. There we hear more about what more can we do to subsidize biofuels and create mandates and make sure that more of it's being produced. So there is always this balance to be struck, and that's what we have to try and do going forward.
Okay.
Matt, I would just add to that, Mike's comment about the process and the troika, is very, very important. And does that get institutionalized in a different way at some point? Probably. But at this point, making sure that the process is in place that allows for continuity between G20 sessions. You don't want to stop and start and start with a whole new agenda and so forth. And we need to see that progress. So I do think with the ICC, G20 business scorecard, it is an attempt to keep the agenda in front of us and to make progress on those initiatives. But you don't want this start and stop, focus.
Okay, great. Well, unless there are any other reporters from Argentina who have another question, sorry, inside joke, I think we'll wrap it up here. And please join me in thanking both Mike and Terry for joining us. Thank you. All right, good.
Yeah.